In today's video, we will uncover the tragic tale of Chris Benoit, a renowned WWE wrestler. Chris was highly celebrated in the wrestling world, having held the titles of World Heavyweight Champion, Tag Team Champion, and numerous other accolades throughout his career. But in 2007, Chris brutally killed his own family. Chris was born on May 21, 1967 in Montreal to parents Michael and Margaret Benoit. He had a sister who lived near Edmonton. Chris loved wrestling from a young age and dreamed of becoming a wrestler. One day, when he was 12 years old, he attended a local wrestling event and became a big fan of two wrestlers, Tom Billington, known as the Dynamite Kid, and Bret Hart. He started his training at the age of 12, and his parents also supported him. Chris trained hard during his teenage years, and one day he met his idol, the Dynamite Kid, and trained with him. At 18, he fought his first wrestling match in Stampede Wrestling. After his debut, he continued to progress without any setbacks. But in 1989, Stampede closed its doors. Therefore, Benoit departed for New Japan Pro Wrestling. Upon arriving to New Japan Pro Wrestling, Benoit spent about a year training with the younger wrestlers to improve his abilities. He spent months doing strenuous activities like push-ups and floor sweeping before stepping into the ring. His career took off, leading him to wrestle for many years in Canada, Australia, and Japan. Chris Benoit became increasingly well known. He established a reputation in the wrestling community, and in 2000, he joined WWE. After which, he won the World Heavyweight Championship and the 2004 Royal Rumble. Now, let's know about his personal life. In 1998, Chris married Martina, and they had 2 children, but the marriage didn't last long. Chris frequently used steroids, which led to uncontrollable anger. It's well known that many wrestlers and bodybuilders regularly use steroids, and one of the common side effects is extreme anger. Due to escalating issues, Martina divorced Chris in 1997. Following their divorce, Chris began a relationship with female wrestler Nancy Sullivan, and they married in 2000. They had a son named Daniel Benoit. Chris's life seemed to be on track, but in 2003, Nancy filed for divorce from Benoit, citing the marriage as irrevocably broken and alleging cruel treatment. She claimed that he would break and throw furniture around. However, this time Chris realized his mistakes and tried his best to save his marriage. Therefore, Nancy decided to give him a last chance. Chris became good friends with fellow wrestler Eddie Guerrero after a match in Japan, where Benoit accidentally kicked Guerrero in the head, knocking him out cold. They played many matches together and traveled for promotions together. Eddie was like a brother to Chris, but unfortunately, on November 13, 2005, Eddie passed away unexpectedly. He was found in a hotel room with a toothbrush in his hand, having died from heart failure. Eddie's death had a deep impact on Chris. He was deeply saddened and fell into depression. People around him said that Chris was never the same after Eddie's death. On June 19, 2007, Chris fought a WWE match. Although he won that match, but everyone could see that Chris had changed. He was no longer as charismatic and entertaining as he used to be. On June 23rd, Chris was scheduled to attend several events, but failed to appear at any of them. He explained that his wife and child were very sick, and he needed to take them to the hospital. The next day, Chris had to catch a flight for the ECW Championship, where his partner was Eddie Guerrero's nephew, Chavo Guerrero. The night before the flight, something very strange happened. Chavo mentioned that Chris sent him a very strange voicemail, so Chavo called him back. Chavo said, "That was strange," so I called him right back and said, "Hey man, are you all right?" He replied, "I'm fine, man. Like I said, I just had a really tough weekend and I just got to take care of Nancy and Daniel at the hospital." I said, "Okay man, I'm here for you." Chris replied, "Okay," and hung up. That was the last time I actually talked to Chris. From this conversation, it was clear that something strange was going on. Anyway, Chavo and Chris spoke a bit later and decided that Chris would arrive at the airport at 8 a.m. and they would head to the event together. Chavo found something particularly strange about the call. Before hanging up, Chris said, "Hey Chavo, I love you." Later that night, at 3:53 a.m., Chavo received a message from Chris saying, "The dogs are in the enclosed pool area. The garage side door is open." 30 seconds later, the same message was sent to Chavo again, but this time from Nancy's phone. Then, another message came from Chris's phone, which was his house address. It was really strange that in the middle of the night, Chris would tell Chavo that the dogs were in the pool area and the garage door was open. Chavo was very confused by these messages, but since it was 4 a.m. and he was scheduled to meet Chris in just a few hours, so he didn't pay much attention and went back to sleep. This was perhaps Chavo's biggest mistake. In the morning, Chavo waited at the airport. After waiting for 3 hours, Chavo realized that Chris wasn't coming. Chris hadn't attended events on Friday and Saturday either because his wife and child were sick, so Chavo assumed he wouldn't come on Sunday too. WWE employees tried to contact Chris multiple times, but there was no response. Chris wasn't picking up his calls, so they left him a voicemail. By 11 p.m., there was still no reply from Chris, so the next day, Chris's agent called the police to check on him. The police reached Chris's house and spoke to his neighbor, Holly. Holly told the police that if Chris and his family weren't home, she would take care of their dogs. Holly went inside to get the dogs while the officer waited outside. Soon, Holly came out screaming because she had found the body of Chris's son, Daniel. The officers quickly went inside and found not only Daniel's body, but also Nancy's and Chris's bodies. Nancy's body was found in the upstairs bedroom with her hands and feet bound and covered with a towel and a Bible placed next to her. Nancy had died from strangulation. According to the police report, Nancy's limbs were bound prior to her death, with her arms being restrained with coaxial cables and her feet being duct taped together. A balled-up combination of a tube sock and tape was also found in the kitchen trash and appeared to be soaked in dried blood, which led police to believe that it was being used as a makeshift gag prior to Nancy's death. Injuries indicated that Chris had pressed a knee into her back while pulling on a cord around her neck, causing strangulation. Toxicologists also found alcohol in Nancy's body, but were unable to determine whether it had been present before death or was a product of decomposition. Daniel was suffocated and killed in his bedroom, and another Bible was left by his body. He had internal injuries to the throat area, showing no bruises. Daniel's exact time of death is unknown. The reports determined Daniel was sedated with Xanax and likely unconscious when he was killed. His body had also just started to show signs of decomposition, but was not as far along as his mother's body. Benoit committed suicide by hanging. He removed the bar from a lat pull-down machine in his exercise room and fashioned the end of a cord from the machine into a noose. He then released the weights, causing his strangulation. So, when Chris said his wife and child were sick and couldn't attend the events on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, he first killed his wife on Friday, then his son on Saturday, and finally himself on Sunday. The news of Chris and his family's deaths shocked everyone. Chris's friends, family, and the entire wrestling community were filled with grief. WWE even aired a 3-hour tribute to Chris, celebrating all his fights and achievements. But the next day, when it was revealed that Chris had killed his family and then himself, WWE realized they shouldn't have given him that tribute and stopped talking about Chris altogether. Everyone was filled with sympathy and anger, with just one question in their minds: why did Chris Benoit do this? A memorial for Nancy and Daniel took place in Florida on the 14th of July, 2007. Both were cremated, and their ashes were placed in starfish-shaped urns for Nancy's family. Chris was also cremated on the 6th of August, 2007, but the fate of his ashes has not been publicly revealed. On the 2016 Talk in Jericho podcast, it was claimed that the search history on Benoit's computer showed that he had researched the quickest and easiest way to break a neck. He had then later used a towel around his neck attached to the handle of the machine, which he pulled down using a very heavy weight and let go, breaking his neck instantly. However, the police report showed no damage to his neck area other than that which came from the cable around his neck. Also, the only topic he researched on his computer was the prophet Elijah's resurrection of a dead child. His autopsy report made no mention of damage to cervical vertebrae, hyoid bone, trachea, or larynx area, further indicating he didn't snap his neck as a manner of suicide. Steroids were found in the Benoit household, leading some media organizations to hypothesize that a steroid-induced rage may have been the cause of Benoit's actions. But some argued that his wife's feet and hands were bound and she was asphyxiated, not beaten to death. By the account of the authorities, there were substantial periods of time between the death of the wife and the death of the son, again suggesting deliberate thought, not rage. The presence of a Bible by each is also not an act of rage. Neuroscientist and former wrestler Christopher Nowinski remarked that Benoit was one of the few wrestlers who would take a chair shot directly to the back of the head, which was very foolish. Julian Bales, the head of neurosurgery at West Virginia University, conducted tests on Benoit's brain and found it to be so severely damaged that it resembled the brain of an 85-year-old with Alzheimer's disease. Additional examinations of Benoit's brain tissue uncovered severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy and extensive damage to all 4 lobes of the brain. Chris did not leave any suicide note, nor did he write anything in the texts explaining why he did it. Whether Chris's actions were intentional, a result of steroid rage, or due to his medical conditions, no one knows the full truth. However, all evidence points to Chris's deteriorating mental state. He was a good person who became a victim of his own mind. Till then, be careful, remain vigilant, and take care of your family. I'll see you next with a new crime story